Well, that's about how far my top will go down. And I've been trying to find out what it's about, and I've discovered that it's most likely the wiring harness right there at that bend. So I'm going to disassemble that wiring harness and find a broken wire and fix it. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut open that loom, the wiring loom, right inside that first bend above the driver's side door. I've propped the lid open. I propped the cover open too. There's a strap holding the cover open. And I cut a piece of 1 or 2x2 to hold the lid up, the convertible top. And now I'm going to fish out that loom and splice into it. First thing I need to do is take off that Torx 20. It's a T20 screw that holds the loom to the convertible top. The next thing I want to do is remove the next clip from the loom. That's the clip right there. And to do that, I'm just going to bend it up and pull it out. Right, now I'm going to bend that clip off, spreading it open and removing it. There's a bit of padding underneath it. I'm going to want to save that clip and reuse it. My bet is that somewhere right here, right at the point of the bend, that there are broken wires. So I want to split open this loom and visually inspect those wires. Now I could go back under this driver's side rear panel and access the module there and test the wiring with a multimeter, as a lot of people have discussed on several of the forums. But that seems like a lot of work when I'm pretty darn sure that the problem, because it's opening halfway, is right here. That when the lid gets back, when the convertible top folds back far enough that this wire achieves a bend, that's when it's signaling the unit that something's wrong and it's stopping it. So rather than horse around inside the back of the car and test for what I really already know is the problem, or feel strongly is the problem, I'm just going to cut this, and my plan is to replace all of the wires. I'm going to splice in a section of wire at the bend, solder them in place, heat shrink tube it, and wrap it back together again neatly, and I think the problem will be solved. I've already read the codes with PA Soft, and I have had discovered some errors, some faults that have been recorded, but I can't really trace them down exactly. So I'm going to visually inspect it and fix it. So I thought that I would be clever and use my soldering gun to whip the ends of this braided fitting, this braided loom, to melt them so that they'll make a nice even termination, so that when I pull these back together again they won't be all frayed. So I'm just using my soldering gun to slowly melt through. And look at that. Oh, and look, there's a broken wire right there. Can you see that? So I've taken the soldering iron and used it to melt this loom, which fuses the ends so they don't fray. And I'm pulling them back, telescoping them back to reveal my wires. And I can see the brown, I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom on in there. There's the broken wire, but I can see signs of one wire is completely broken, and there may be another wire here that's about to break. I went out and bought some 14 gauge wire and some 10 gauge wire, but now that I'm in here and I see how these wires are small, I don't want to make this get too big. So I may have to go buy some 18 gauge wire to splice in here. I think the 14 gauge wire is going to be too big. So I can't slide this loom back any further than this padding will let me. So I'm going to use some flush cutters to cut off this. This is the padding that went inside the clip. Remove that. And now I should be able to slide this way on back. So I'll be able to get access to a lot of the the wire in here to do my splicing. So, pulled back the insulation, or pulled back the, what do we call this? The braided loom. After discovering the point in the wire where it's snapped, I also inspected it further up, and there's another point right here about to break. So I want to go well above that area, trim it back, and splice in another section of wire. I've decided to use 18 gauge wire because I don't want the overall bundle of wire to gain too much in diameter or girth, because it needs to fit into this small space. I don't have a proper wire stripper, so I'll use my flush cutters. And I think I'm gonna take about, I'm going to try and stagger the ends of these wires so that they don't all splice at the same point and create a really fat area. I'm cutting off about, I took about 2 or 3 inches out. Yeah, probably about that much. And I'm going to slide a piece of heat shrink up to the splice and center it, and then I'll use a heat gun to melt that, to shrink it down. Here we got it. That's one. So as I look at this wire, I see signs of breakage right there. Can that be seen? There's a crack there. So that's a sign that this one's going to break soon too. So I think it's best that we continue. Now we're going to solder a section into a fatter wire, a wire that has a lot more gauge to it. So I'm using 14 gauge wire here. I'm a little concerned that BMW used a really fine gauge stranded wire that's obviously more flexible than what I found at AutoZone. I think it'll be okay, but if you can find wire that has very, very fine strands, it's going to be more resistant to bending and breaking. So I've spliced in 2 sections of wire, one for one of the fatter, probably ground wires, and the first signal wire that was actually broken. Now I'm investigating these other 2 signal wires that feel like they have a weakness at the same point, and I'm inclined to cut them and splice them now rather than have to come back and do this on another weekend. So I'd like to be able to stagger the points where they're spliced, but there's not really a lot of room, and I want the splice to not be at the point of the bend. So here we go. Cut. I'll cut a section out of this guy. Now I can explore and see if it really was broken. So these wires are very fine. They're finer than the wires that I'm able to find in the store, and that gives them more flexibility. So I'm a little concerned that the wires that I'm replacing these with are not going to withstand the same amount of bending. If you can do anything to find stranded wire where the individual strands are as fine as this, you'll be doing a better job than I'm doing today. I've changed my mind and I'm not going to do the rest of these. I think this will do it. So I'm able to reuse the loom, and I'll just need to tape up the business section here where the bend happens onto the electrical tape. Well, I've wrapped it in electrical tape. It would probably be a good idea to test it and see if the roof works at this point. So let's do that. And open. And no flashing red lights. I love it.